get tired of hearing that passage.
Yeah. That's the same
the
one I
whole
read
2
it.
times, yeah. So to get things started, can you talk a little bit about the genesis of the fugue? Like, how long did you have the idea of the novel in your mind?
Well, I had many ideas brewing at once, and I didn't know that they were related to each other. I didn't realize that. You know, I had an idea in my mind for a story about a sculptor. I had an idea in my mind for a story about a composer. I had ideas in my mind for stories about refugees and a house fire and all sorts of things. But I didn't know that all of those things could end up in a book, right? This book started out as a vignette, a very short, I'd say, a 400-word text that I wrote in my apartment in New York City, just on a whim. And the character at that time, his name was Yuri. He lived in Amsterdam, and he had broken his window, so he was building a new window for himself. That was it. That window ends up in the first chapter, by the way. And then I was working on other things, and this character, this sculptor who was building a window, just kept coming back. He kept appearing. He kept doing things. He kept talking to me. I kept dreaming about him. I gave him a voice, and I'd have conversations in his voice while taking a shower and things like this. So I started writing about him, and soon enough he had a girlfriend, and he had a family, and he had a history, and he had a place to live. And I moved him from Amsterdam to Cicero because I knew more about that place. And it just kept going, and then I realized, you know what? I've got a novel here. I've got an epic family cross-generational mammoth thing that I can write. And so I committed to it, and I realized that I have it. And so when you have it, you should do it, right? But the genesis of this book was a very short little dinky exercise that I didn't think very much about at the time, really, at all.
And that was in what year?
That was 2000.
2000.
That was 2000, yeah.
So it was a little while ago.
It was, yeah. I mean, I figured out pretty quickly that I had a novel. I'd say a few months later I realized, okay, this isn't just a little story anymore. There's all kinds of stuff going on here. Now, what does that mean? You realize it in your head, right? You realize that there's this mammoth thing in your head that needs to get out. And so when I sat down to work, I would work on that and not much else. And it took forever to get it out, but it eventually got out. Yeah.
Right on. So your book actually unfolds like a fugue. Can you speak a little bit about how you determine that organizing principle and how it operates in the book?
Well, all right. That's a very hard thing to talk about, actually. Yeah. You know, Mike Chesniewski, I don't know if you know who he is. He wrote Chicago Stories. What is it? 44 dramatic fictions or 34 dramatic or whatever, some amount of dramatic fictions. And he was asked a question during an interview, which I loved. They asked him, "How did you do this thing?" And I don't remember what the thing was. How did you do this thing? And he said, you know, that's like asking a bird how a bird flies. A bird has no idea how it flies. And I loved that answer because that's kind of how I felt. I really love that musical structure. I really love fugues. And there are ways of rationalizing why I love fugues, and then there are ways of just accepting that aesthetic, that organizing principle is really pleasant to me. And the reason it's pleasant is because it's symmetric and it's clean and it has this mathematical integrity and at the same time it expresses these really deep emotions. Now, what's a fugue, right? For people that don't know, it's kind of an exotic title, actually. A fugue is a type of musical composition in which there are many ways to talk about it, but I like simplifying it. There's no accompaniment, right? There's no accompaniment. There's not a part of the music that's just there to fill in. All of the parts of the music are their own part, and they flow forward, and the beauty of it is how they interact with each other. And so, for me, when I realized what a fugue was, and when I started to understand these things more on a structural level instead of just on a feeling of, oh, I really like this and it makes me feel good, I realized that expression was a really interesting metaphor for the interplay between all people. Right, because if you take a look at life from a bird's eye view, there are no supporting players. right? There's no supporting cast. The supporting cast is in your head, but from a bird's eye view, right, from this mammoth view, there's no supporting player. Everybody's playing this role that intertwines itself with all these other roles constantly, and most people have no way of knowing what led to this moment, right? All the things that led to this moment. Now, a fugue is like that, right? You find yourself 20 minutes into this piece, and there's something going on, and it's just this dramatic and beautiful thing, but it depends absolutely, with absolute precision, on all these things that happened before in order to get there, but you can't keep track of it, right? There's no way. So for me, that was a curious thing, and when I figured that out, I thought, why not try to write a book that way, right? Why not try to write a book in which there's no accompaniment and there's no supporting cast, where every character is his and her own universe that intertwines with all these other ones, you know? So yeah, that's where it came from.
Excellent. All right. The first passage that you read, where Yuri just gets out of jail and he's walking around Cicero, it's summer of 1994. That's such a perfect example of how you create a very vivid sense of place. Can you talk a little bit about how setting plays a significant role in your novels or in your work?
Yeah. For me, setting is everything. For me, setting is character. There's really no difference. You know, I teach in a community college, and I teach a film class, and one of the things that I ask students to look for, of course, are patterns or things that repeat themselves and occur more than once. And students very often are shocked to realize how often a film will begin with some sort of landscape shot or just kind of a shot of a city. There's the city, here it is, Phoenix, Arizona, right? Beginning of Psycho. Or No Country for Old Men, there's just this landscape, right? Why? Well, because, man, that's where it's happening, right? That's where, and certain things are just entirely and completely dependent on that. So again, how, I don't know, but it's really important to me, right? The kind of experiences that you have when you travel. You know, you get on a plane, and 8 hours ago you were in this place that had one set of rules, and now you're in a place that has a completely different set of rules. And those rules are very clear to people who live there. They're utterly foreign to you. In some cases, you don't really know what they are. And yet everything depends on them, and everything depends on knowing them. And so the type of awareness that you develop when that happens is really curious, and I like paying attention to that awareness that develops when you travel. But I also like bringing it home, because you know, it's like they say, you don't know very much about your own language until, when you learn a foreign language, you learn a lot more about your own language than you do about the foreign language. And I think it's true when you travel, when you go to another place, you really learn what your place is all about, actually. And that's fascinating, because the place, it just determines so many things. The time it happens and the place where it happens just means so much. And I think that my writing is the way it is and feels the way it does because that's just how I look at space, you know.
So, and most of the characters in your text here have some kind of traumatic backstory. What role would you say art plays in, or what relationship would you say art has with trauma in the novel?
Well, for me personally, the creation of art is therapeutic and cathartic, right? It's a place to express things that are unfathomable and without and that, you know, it's ironic to say language fails, but I'm using language as a medium. But even so, that a novel that tries to deal with trauma is quite different from the story that you tell your friends at a bar about how, you know, you lost your grandmother and it made you sad or whatever it might be. So from that point of view, it's cathartic, but at the same time, I think, you know, I'm a firm believer in certain artistic ideas that are rather unfashionable these days, and people would call them conservative, but I really don't see how you can escape them. You know, Goethe says, "He who cannot draw in 4,000 years lives from hand to mouth." I really believe that. I really do. I really believe that if you're in a position to know the story, you should know the story, and if you can gather the story, you learn that the story is not the Hollywood story, right? That story doesn't exist. It does exist, but that's just one little slice of it. There are all these other things. And the conflicts that we encounter in Western civilization and Western letters are traumatic. They're you know, if you read a book that's 600 years old, it's not about picking daisies, man. It's about something really crazy. And there's a reason why it lasted, I think, is that those events and the way we deal with them artistically, aesthetically, intellectually, politically, name your Ali, that's how we deal with it, right? That's important, and art's central to that. You know, I mean, if you study a culture, you take a look at their political system, you take a look at their economy, and you take a look at their artistic expression. And when you take a look at their artistic expression, I don't care what you're studying, it says this is how we dealt with the bad times, right? This is what we did, and clearly there's something to that, you know. So, in the book, two of the characters, Yuri, the man who gets out of prison, and a friend of his, a piano teacher that he had, a composer, they kind of get through their madness by making art, you know, and it helps in a way, but in a way it just makes things worse.
Sometimes. So in talking with you the other night, it sounded like you had a very clear mission for this novel. You didn't just pursue it in a meaningless kind of way. Did you want to share a little bit?
Sure. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about audience, right? And when you start writing something, do you have people in mind that you'd like to read it? And you know, it's fun to play that game. It's fun to sit down when you're trying to write something and wonder who will read this and who will respond to it and how will they respond and will anyone ever respond or whatever. I had two people in mind, and they were fetishes essentially. They were fantasies. Two groups of people in mind that I hoped would get to it. One group is the person that has never read a novel before would pick this one up and discover that that's what novels are, right? If I could find a way to reach that person and get them to do it, that would be really exciting. And so I kind of had that in mind while writing it, that you know, if you keep the language actually kind of simple, but you keep the conflict pretty intense, and you take the reader through this journey with a certain amount of help, right, where you don't depend on the reader to put too much together on his or her own, that person might have a really good time with it. But then again, I had the people in mind who have read everything, you know, the old timer with a pipe and an ugly jacket in some office at the University of Illinois, where he has smoked cigarettes for, you know, hours and hours every day for whatever amount of time. I had that person in mind, most certainly, and then I thought I wanted that person to have a really, really good time trying to put a lot of this stuff together, because there's stuff in there from musicology. There are plenty of allusions in there to old books, to old Russian books and old European books. There's a puzzle and a game to play when you have the context of 4,000 years, you know, and I did have those people in mind. You know, I'm not going to pretend I didn't. You know, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Your novel's been referred to as an homage to the urban grit of Nelson Algren and the family sagas of Leo Tolstoy.
Mm-hmm.
And in my view, that's outstanding. But how do you feel about these associations?
You're being compared to two geniuses, right?
You're offended, right?
Yeah, what are you going to do?
Respond.
How dare you say these things?
Exactly.
You know, okay, Nelson Algren's an idol, right? Clearly, he's to me absolutely essential. I'm skeptical of people who live in Chicago all their lives and never heard of him. To me, that's really confusing. And then Leo Tolstoy's Leo Tolstoy. He wrote Anna Karenina, he wrote War and Peace and whatever. Now, when I was right there. This is for book nerds, right? This is like a classic argument that you could get into with people who study literature or something like that. Like, who's the greatest novelist of all time? One time when a bunch of us were drunk in a bar in New York City, we decided that there's one answer that's correct all the time, and then there are many answers that are wrong most of the time. And the correct answer all the time is either Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, right? You can pick one of those two. Then you can argue, right? Then you can get into it after that, right? Now, of course, these are drunk students in a bar coming up with this stuff. But when at that time, I was really in the Dostoevsky camp, and I had just finished, when I started this book, I had just finished all of Dostoevsky's late novels, and I had read them like straight through 3 times in a row or something to just go completely crazy with them. Mm-hmm. And they were with me while this was going on. I didn't really have Tolstoy with me.
Yeah, I feel a little bit more Dostoevsky in this than Tolstoy.
But I think that the person who came up with that has in mind the family saga, right? The idea that there's a family narrative here that's actually almost like a soap opera or something, where all these people are intermingling in ways, and some of them face conflicts that depend entirely on a meeting or a conflict or a conversation that occurred years before they were even born, and they have no idea about it. They have no idea that it happened. It's not even on their map. It doesn't exist. And that's kind of the Tolstoy thing, where, you know, in some person's mind, they remember Mother, and then Mother is completely different from how he remembers. You know, I think that's what they have in mind. You know.
So what other authors influenced your writing, would you say?
Well, Dybeck was a very strong influence. You know, I was reading a lot of European books at the time. I was reading a lot of Sebald at the time, and Sebald is, a lot of people don't know who he is. He's this guy who writes these books that have these photographs in them, and these photographs kind of pop in unusually, and there will be some reference in the text to something in the photograph that you had not noticed when you first looked at it. There will be something in the background, a plate back there or something, and he's constantly playing this game where he makes you revisit something and look at it anew constantly. So that was there. Now I'm drawing a blank, right? Because it was so long ago when I started it. But the big Chicago writers were all a big influence on me. The big Russian books were a big influence. I had gone to a lecture by Susan Sontag that made me go back and look at a bunch of her stuff, and that was with me at the time. Philip Roth gave a speech when I was there, and that was with me at the time. So a hodgepodge, you know, like a really weird hodgepodge.
So what have been some of the reactions to your book that were very unexpected?
Somebody told me that I write really well as a woman.
Yeah, Victorian.
Right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. That was unexpected, right? And there was a lot of self-consciousness there, because, I mean, you know, it's bombastic. Here I am. I'm going to write the diary of a woman, right? Mm-hmm. So I wasn't really expecting that, really. Mm-hmm. The weirdest one so far was that somebody asked me, "Why would you write a book about chocolate?" And chocolate is neither a motif nor a metaphor, nor does it make any very strong appearance in the book at all. And I had no idea what this person was talking about. And I said, "What do you mean?" Right? He said, "Well, the title's Fudge." And I said, "Oh yeah,
Of course.
that part."
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, you're gonna have to read it if you want to find out why.
Well, you wanted the audience that had never read the novel.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. So you hit it right. Yeah.
So I'll ask just one more question, and then we can open it up to the
Sure.
audience. But what is next for you beyond the fugue, or even with the fugue?
Well, I'm writing a bunch of stuff right now, and I'm kind of trying to find which one is going to stick. I have one idea, right? I would like to write a German book in English. Now, what does that mean? That means that, right, it's kind of like trying to write a composition in literature. Right, what is the German book in English, right? A German book, if you think about it in kind of really cheap, stereotypical terms, it's a book that has really long sentences that are really dense about some guy who wants to kill himself, right? I mean, that's like the German book, right? So I want to take that idea and simultaneously pay tribute and homage to it, because I think those books are really, really amazing, but at the same time kind of make fun of it and turn it into a farce. but not, right? So I'm working on how to do that, and that book is going to be set in Linz, which is where I spent 3 years of my life. I lived in Linz, Austria for 3 years of my life, and Finding the Moon and Sugar was like the Vilnius book. It was like the Lithuania book. A large portion of that book takes place in Vilnius, Lithuania, which is a really important place to me. It's a place that I love very much and feel like it's a second home. This was the Chicago book, right? That is based on my hometown, and that book is going to be the Linz book, the German world book, right?
Gotcha.
So I'm going to do that, but that I haven't really even started writing that. I've taken some sketch work, but that's about it. And then I'm working on a proposal for a work of nonfiction that is, I'm realizing, much more complicated than I originally thought. It's about race, really, about race relations in America, and it's partially a memoir of growing up in a town, right, that has a reputation of being really racist. And that reputation was not earned on. It's deserved. It's very well deserved. So I'm contemplating that, but this book just came out, and frankly, I'm still kind of working on making people aware, and that's kind of the focus right now.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
And does anybody have any questions, or
Not really. You took my question.
what was that?
What's next?
What's next? Yeah.
He and I wrote First Generation of Lithuanian American, and I'm trying to write through some projects myself. So I'm curious about your thoughts about cross-generational trauma and how that played a role.
Well, it's essential, right? It's essential. There's I recently some scientist figured this out that the trauma of your ancestors is actually in your DNA, and it can be measured.
Genetics.
Yeah.
I've actually
right.
watched a lot of documentaries about
Yeah.
it and stuff. It's pretty fascinating.
So I intuited this as a teenager.
Me too.
Right. I didn't
Right.
I didn't need to be told this. And of course, what Linda's talking about, for those in the audience that aren't aware of this, we're both children of World War II refugees, right? And the trauma that they've experienced, they don't really articulate. In some ways, they can't articulate it, but you know it. It's not foreign to you. That grandmother's standing by the window and staring out into the street and weeping, inexplicably for some reason. And it's not something that happened yesterday, right? It's something in the bones, that's just suddenly, who knows what, like raindrops on the window may have triggered some memory or something like that. So, that's essential, and for a person who's in that position, who grew up with that and is writing, I don't see how you can get around it, really. I mean, you have to deal with it. The interesting thing for me was to try to create art out of this idea that there are characters who are experiencing something and are feeling a feeling and are perceiving something at the moment, but don't know what it's connected to, really. They can't see that thing. That thing's invisible to them, but the reader can, right?
Yeah.
And the reader can see that, oh yeah, when that happens to you, there's no way it won't have any effect on these people.
Right.
Right. There's just no way, and I don't want to tell you what that is. But that's essential, and it's absolutely essential to someone who's had that experience, and to someone who is trying to write through it.
That's exactly what I was just
right.
going to say. You have to write through it.
Yeah, you write through it.
Go into it,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't even know what that is. It's the weirdest.
No. It's like a tooth trying to bite itself.
Yeah.
Or it's like, right, the lake doesn't know that it's reflecting the sky. That's what it's like.
You'd said, I read a piece on your blog. History is a massive, unfathomable force sprawled out behind you, yet entirely present in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that feeling is.
Mm-hmm.
Is that when you were standing at the corner where Fort Dearborn was?
Yeah.
Knowing that, these horrible